Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. A special vigil was held in Lethbridge Monday night for a 6-week-old baby girl who's recovering at a Calgary hospital after being sexually assaulted. A lawyer who represented protesters at the Freedom Convoy in Ottawa last winter is taking issue with the timing of the report being released on the public inquiry into the Emergencies Act. And Open Doors has released its top 10 list of the worst countries in the world when it comes to persecuting Christians.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Many of us were shocked at the news when Lethbridge police said they had charged 2 parents in connection with the assault of a 6-week-old baby girl. An investigation determined the infant had been assaulted and sexually assaulted many times. She remains in critical condition at the Alberta Children's Hospital in Calgary. A candlelit vigil was held Monday evening by members of the Lethbridge community. BCN's Naveen Day was there and has the story.
All love, all these people, heal.
A small child begins the evening with a prayer. Then candles are lit to an emotional a cappella version of Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah. This is how the evening began at a candlelit vigil held Monday in support of a weeks-old newborn who is fighting for her life. A sizable crowd came out and organizers took donations for the baby, hoping to be able to send hope, prayers, and resources for when the newborn is out of emergency care. One of the organizers, Kathleen Lacombe, says many members of the community were distraught at the news and reported to her that hearing it opened up old wounds for them.
This evening I had a woman come up to me who came here to the vigil and thanked us for putting it on. I mean, this is just something we're all doing, but it meant something to her because she broke down and cried on my shoulder tonight because she is a victim, a survivor. And sorry, that's emotional for me. The police officers expressed to me today their pain, how they're hurting. One of the news ladies who came today, she cried. That meant something to me to have a news lady cry. She hears a lot of things, but this hurt her.
Lacombe adds she is in talks with Victim Services Alberta to collect impact statements from members of the community. The parents, a 52-year-old male and 31-year-old female, were remanded to custody following judicial interim release hearings. The organizers of this vigil have also planned a peaceful protest outside the courthouse on January 25th.
I believe that a lot of other people are going to come too. We've got some Edmonton, Calgary, Medicine Hat. There's some Medicine Hat here here tonight, Red Deer, things like that. And we're all just going to come there to be peaceful, but to also just express that the baby's voice is there. It's present. We know that there's obviously people in the court who are going to fight for baby, but we're just going to stand there and let them know that we're there as well.
For Bridge City News, I'm Naveen Day.
Praying for that little baby girl. Wow. Alberta Health Services says a technical outage which delayed some surgeries and forced doctors and staff at hospitals back to paper charts has been resolved. It said the services should be restored by now, including electronic medical records along with community and hospital lab services. It also said it was contacting patients to rebook surgeries that were postponed. AHS says it is promising a third-party review to determine the root cause of the outage, but says there was no indication it was from hacking or any form of cyber attack. Eva Chipiuk is one of the lawyers who represented some of the Freedom Convoy protesters last winter in Ottawa. Chipiuk, who spoke during the public inquiry into the Emergencies Act, also addressed Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. She recently took to social media, taking issue with news that the findings from Justice Paul Rouleau, who oversaw the inquiry, will allegedly be released to the Trudeau Liberals long before they are made public. Eva Chipiuk joins us now from Edmonton to discuss this in more detail. Eva, what time frame are we talking about here?
So under the Emergencies Act, the commissioner is required to provide the report to Parliament and the public on or before the Emergencies Act was revoked, 1 year. They have 1 year time frame. But what the government did is they also enacted an order in council that is directing the commission to issue the report to cabinet by February 6th. And that's something we caught later, and it's very questionable why the government has asked or directed the commission to provide them a report 2 weeks in advance.
Wow. Thanks so much, Eva. That was lawyer Eva Chipiuk joining us from Edmonton. Federal Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre took to social media explaining how so many young Canadians can never afford to own a home. He chatted with a man in Vancouver who says he can't save up considering how his rent is simply going through the roof.
Everybody, meet Aaron. We're in Vancouver. Aaron's got an MBA, a good job, but he has to have a roommate and a rental because he can't afford a home here in Vancouver. Why can't you afford a home?
Oh, because the rent is through the roof. My landlord sold my last place, had to find a new place, and the rent went up $600 a month from the last place I went, and about the same location, about the same type of place.
Amazing.
Two bedroom, 2 bathrooms, $600 a month more.
That's an extra $7,200 a year in higher rent. Justin Trudeau has doubled the rent in this country. He's doubled housing prices, and after telling people that interest rates would never go up, now they're shooting through the roof, and people like this young man are shut out of the housing market. What's the solution? End the inflationary deficits that are driving up the cost of living and interest rates. Get the gatekeepers out of the way.
Yeah.
I will tell the big city government gatekeepers that they won't get infrastructure money unless they clear the way and allow more houses to be built so that young people can actually afford a home.
Meanwhile, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and his caucus are at a retreat in Hamilton, Ontario. The PM had a chance to sit down with Hamilton Mayor Andrea Horwath to talk about how Ottawa is working with municipalities to address various issues they're facing.
So I look forward to working with you closely on the things that are your priorities and mine, particularly housing, homelessness, infrastructure, transit, growing the economy in ways that create good jobs for people in Hamilton now and well into the future. These are all things that I know we can work on, among many other things.
Meanwhile, here in Lethbridge, the need for shelter and housing for our homeless population has been a hot-button topic over the past few years. An official motion at Tuesday's City Council meeting brought forward asking City administration to conduct a long-term response for those in need of shelter and housing, and that includes a permanent shelter for our most vulnerable during the bitterly cold winter months and during the scorching hot summer months. Council voted unanimously to move forward with a motion.
I think Council is still waiting for some real options to either buy, lease, or rent, and finally approve a more permanent solution. This motion is presented to express a sense of urgency on this matter.
This does give definitive direction to administration to continue that work and actually report back to council with a set date, which I think is extremely important.
There is now clear direction that this is an initiative of council, and we want this to be moved forward expeditiously.
City officials say provincial funding of $1 million is available if the City of Lethbridge is able to find a location for the shelter and provide the necessary approvals. Well, some areas here in southwestern Alberta saw a little bit more of the white stuff earlier today. Jeanette Rocher is in now with an early peek at the forecast. Jeanette, we may have seen some light flurries, but it's still been fairly mild considering we're nearing the end of January.
Well, that's true, Hal. We have been able to keep our heads above that freezing mark for the most part, even getting to a high of 4 degrees today, higher than that expected too. As we look to the rest of the week, though, we're going to see a bit of a variation there. Still expecting a lovely day on Thursday, but after that, we're talking old man winter, and winter with a capital W. As we get to the weekend and into next week, we're going to see those temperatures plunge by quite a bit. I will be back later in the show to give you that 7-day forecast.
Okay, thanks so much, Jeanette. The Lethbridge College Kodiaks announced a new state-of-the-art esports facility on Tuesday morning. Esports is categorized as a form of competition using online sports gaming. As BCN's Micah Quinn explains now, officials from the college showcased the new area and how it'll benefit those who are hardcore gamers.
I've been wanting to be involved in esports since I was 15, 16 years old is when I first started playing.
The Lethbridge College Kodiak's esports team will be competing in the Eastern College Athletic Conference season from its brand new facility at the college. There are currently 15 student athletes on the squad this year.
It's been a long, patient road to wait for esports to come to the college, because if you look around, let's just say South Korea and America as examples, it's been around for like many decades publicly and professionally.
The esports team officially became part of the Kodiak's family in the summer of 2022, and each student has full access to all the perks that the Kodiaks offer, including gym access, jerseys, gear, health and academic support, and even potential scholarships.
What an exciting opportunity, and I'm amazed even just with all the friends and family that I know that have just said, so wait, you're doing esports now? And then what they think is, okay, NHL 2 or NBA 2K, those kind of things. But again, it's not the traditional esports games.
The esports team competes in games like Valorant, Rocket League, and even League of Legends.
It was cool, like teaching people like how esports works and like how communication works and just like the mental and everything surrounding the game.
The Eastern College Athletics Conference winter season kicks off January 31st, and each team will have one match per week, with playoffs being held in April. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
Looks like a lot of fun. The Lethbridge Eagles are hosting their annual Mental Health and Memorial Game coming up next weekend. The team has been putting on the hockey games for the past couple of years after suddenly losing one of their former teammates to a mental health illness. Co-head coach Aaron O'Toole says these types of events are important to not only spread awareness, but to let people know that supports are available.
When you go and you play team sports, and specifically hockey, as a coach, I grew up playing the game, and that support and that camaraderie that you have within that dressing room and on the ice, and how you work together towards a common goal, it's massive. It can create a support network that not only lasts within that season for a handful of months, but for a lifetime. I have friends that I've had for years that get to be in my court and help me through the kind of ups and downs and turbulence of my life. So that conversation within not just sport, but just in general, I think is even vastly more important for our youth.
And by the way, the Eagles will be hosting Cochrane at the Nicholas Sharon Arena in Lethbridge on Saturday, February the 4th. Lethbridge Police say the annual Polar Plunge is returning to Henderson Lake this year. Pandemic restrictions forced the last few years to be held virtually. Organizers say they're pretty excited to have the event in person once again. The initiative raises awareness and funds for Special Olympics. Constable Braylon Hagan explains how much they're hoping to bring in this year.
This year we're looking at raising, our goal is $150,000, and so far I think we're up at least halfway there, or getting close to the halfway point with, and that's in the province. So we do have 6 different locations in Alberta that we will be having the plunges at. There's about 2,500 athletes here in Alberta that funds from all these events go to help support. So that's anything from gymnasiums for their practices. Last week they just had a bowling tournament in Calgary, so a lot of our athletes from Lethbridge, I think there's 40 people that went up to the bowling tournament in Calgary. So funds like that help support all that activity, all their training time, gymnasiums, and their equipment.
The 2023 Polar Plunge will be taking place on February the 4th, and it should be a lot of fun. You know, 1 in 7 Christians around the world faces persecution and discrimination for their faith. That's according to a new report released by Open Doors. The group launched this year's World Watch List, highlighting where faith costs the most. As we hear in this next story, the report says North Korea is the worst when it comes to persecuting believers.
Over 360 million Christians around the world face persecution and discrimination every day. And these are the top 10 countries where Christians risk everything for Christ. Number 10, Sudan. Unrest in Sudan has increased following a military coup. Violence and pressure against Christians have worsened. At number 9, Afghanistan. Following the Taliban takeover, those Christians who have not fled the country have been forced deep underground. If discovered, they face death. Iran is at number 8. Iranian house churches are seen as a threat by the Islamist regime. Church members who are caught are given long prison sentences. Number 7, Pakistan. Pakistan's infamous blasphemy laws are often used to target believers. Christian women and girls are vulnerable to kidnap and forced marriage. Nigeria is at number 6. More Christians are killed in Nigeria than in all the other countries of the world combined. And the violence is getting worse. Number 5, Libya. In this lawless land, both native and migrant Christians are targeted, kidnapped, and even killed. At number 4 is Eritrea. Christians who dare to meet without official permission risk arrest. Over 1,000 believers are in jail without charge. Yemen is number 3 on the list. The humanitarian crisis continues. Anyone suspected of being a Christian will be deliberately overlooked for aid and might be expelled or killed by their own tribe. Number 2 is Somalia. Islamic militants are intensifying their hunt for Christians, and violent attacks are increasing. And at number 1, North Korea, the most dangerous place in the world to be a Christian. Spies are everywhere. Discovery means death, either by execution or by being worked to death in a labor camp.
Well, praying for our brothers and sisters around the world. Well, we had a mixed bag today, which included some light flurries in parts of southwestern Alberta. Fortunately, the temperature should remain above 0 for most of the week. Full weather details are on deck. We saw some seasonal values again in Lethbridge today, which was around the freezing mark. Not too bad for this time of year. Jeanette Rocher is now with a complete look at the weather forecast. Jeanette, it'll be mild before Mother Nature kind of jumps off a cliff?
Yeah, you are so right. And it's going to be a very big cliff too, because look at those temperatures by the time we get into next week and the weekend. Ouch. I don't even want to think about that right now. I just want to focus on this right here. We're looking at a high of 0 degrees tomorrow on Wednesday. Not too bad, right? We could still see a little bit of flurries as well into Thursday. There's the nice day. We're going to see a high of 7 degrees, partly cloudy skies. We could see a slight chance of flurries as well on Friday and Friday evening. High of 0 degrees. And then that's when we're going to get into that plunge for the weekend, that plunge in temperature, minus 14 the high on Saturday, all the way down to minus 19 on Sunday, and then rounding out that 7-day forecast on Monday with only a high of minus 16. So that's going to take us into our low averages for this time of year. Average low minus 14, average high minus 2. 17 was our high temperature on this day back in 2005, and we were sitting at a freezing minus 41 back in 1957. Sun rose this morning at 8:15 a.m. and sunset this evening at 5:12, giving us 8 hours and 57 minutes of daylight. So we're almost at that 9-hour mark. Okay, what can we expect tomorrow on the West Coast? Well, I will tell you, we could see a 30% chance of drizzle in Victoria, 8 degrees the high there, chance of showers as well in Vancouver, 7 degrees the high there. Edmonton, looking at a mix of flurries and showers, 4 degrees the high, a high of 2 degrees in Calgary. Calgary could see a bit of flurry activity as well. As we look to the rest of the prairies, not as much in the way of too much showers, but a little bit of flurry activity. Saskatoon's expecting a high of 5, minus 3 the high in Regina, could see a bit of snow as well, and a chilly minus 13 in Winnipeg, and it's going to feel more like in the minus 30s with that wind chill, especially in the morning as we look to the central part of the country. Okay, there is a Texas low, which is traveling northeast, and it's going to bring with it a lot of snow. So we're looking at snowfall warnings for all 3 of these cities here, expecting 10 to 20 centimeters, particularly by tomorrow evening. So most of that snowfall beginning tomorrow afternoon. Minus 7 the high in Fredericton tomorrow, minus 0 rather in Halifax, minus 6 in Charlottetown tomorrow, and rounding out at a steady 0 degrees in St. John's, Newfoundland, with a chance of flurries there as well. So there you have it. That is your forecast.
Today's weather report is brought to you by Ridge Utilities, providing competitive rates for electricity, natural gas, and internet, while investing back in communities across southern Alberta.
As Canadians struggle to buy food, grocery stores are releasing their profit numbers, and for many, they're very, very strong. Metro says its profits increased 11.3%. Company officials say its first quarter net income jumped from $207.7 million to $231.1 million, while revenue jumped 8.2% to $4.67 billion. Stats Canada says grocery inflation during the same period from September to December varied between 11 and 11.4%. Metro also announced it is hiking its dividend to shareholders by 10% amid accusations by critics that grocers are profiteering at a time of spiraling inflation. Rogers' acquisition of Shaw Communications got a big boost as an appeals court rejected the call by Canada's antitrust czar to reverse an earlier ruling that favored the deal. Justice David Stratus said the appeal court agrees with the tribunal along with the submissions made by Rogers and Shaw. The three-judge panel ruled to dismiss an appeal by the Competition Commissioner in less than 6 hours after the hearing began. On Wednesday, the House of Commons Industry Committee will begin a public hearing into the merger, a second review by federal lawmakers. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 2 points on the day to finish at 20,629. The Dow was up 104 points to 33,733. The S&P 500 was down 2 on the day to 4,016. And the Nasdaq was down 30 points to 11,334. West Texas Intermediate Oil was down $1.39 to $80.23 U.S. per barrel. Natural gas was down 20 cents to $3.25 U.S. Gold was up $6.38 to $19.3742 U.S. an ounce, and silver was even at $23.68 U.S. an ounce. Feed wheat is at $11.97 per bushel, barley's at $9.31, canola's at $18.05, and corn is at $11.17 per bushel. Live cattle February contract was up 38 cents to $157.85. Feeder cattle January contract was down 23 cents to $178.95, and lean hogs February contract was down 48 cents to $77.10. The Canadian dollar was even over the past 24 hours at 74.81 U.S. Recapping one of our top stories, Alberta Health Services says a technical outage which delayed some surgeries and forced doctors and staff at hospitals back to paper charts has been resolved. It said the services should be restored by now, including electronic medical records along with community and hospital lab services. It also said it was contacting patients to rebook surgeries that were postponed. Are electric vehicles really one of the best ways to save the planet? In fact, is there enough infrastructure, including charging stations, to support EVs? What about if you have to replace all of the batteries? How costly would that be? Coming up, a different perspective on EVs from Michelle Sterling, who's with Friends of Science. See her exclusive interview with BCN's Naveen Day in just a moment. Listen, if you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. We'd love to hear from you.
As we know, certain governments, including our Canadian Liberal government, are demanding consumer acceptance of electric cars by 2030. But there are those sounding an alarm as to the actual costs to the environment, communities, and consumers. To enlighten us more on the cause of caution on electric vehicles and about a controversial proposed bill the Trudeau Liberals plan to introduce, we have Michelle Sterling from Friends of Science joining us from Calgary. Michelle, welcome back to Bridge City News.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on the show.
It's great having you. Now, first off, can you describe the biggest differences between a petrol-powered car versus an electric car? Would it be durability or maybe just efficiency?
A lot of the people promoting EVs are promoting the aspect of energy efficiency because in the actual operation of an EV, it is somewhat more energy efficient. But you need to really look at the back end of it, at the embedded emissions, and also all the things around an EV, like the infrastructure doesn't exist for it. We don't have enough power generation to support it. We'd have to build 10,000 megawatts more power just for the EV policy. And remember, the federal government is saying that we should electrify everything. So think how many more power generation plants we'd need. But there are other problems with EVs. They don't operate very well in extremely cold or extremely hot weather. You can't tow them. So if you go in the ditch, you can't just be towed out. You need a flatbed to come and pick you up.
Oh.
You can't bring a jerry can of electricity to somebody if they're stuck on the road. And the range reduces rather rapidly in cold weather. So I suppose if you're going between Calgary and Edmonton, that's not a big deal because you could stop in Red Deer and charge up. But, if you're off-road or in the mountain highways, that could actually be life-threatening.
Right. Now, my dentist drives an EV, and she has a practice in both Lethbridge and Calgary. She says in the winter, she barely has enough energy to get to Calgary. She has to charge up right away, and because the car's not generating its own heat, and so it has to use the power to generate the heat.
That's right. There's a story in, I think it's called Motor Mouth, and a couple of people drove all across the US in an EV to prove that they could do it. And I think they did it in about 3 days. But they did it without any cabin heat, with 3 layers of clothes and blankets.
Oh, wow.
And, that's not how people normally want to travel. So they completely cut off the cabin heat. Now, for cities, EVs are probably a good choice within the city, but a hybrid vehicle does both. It reduces emissions in the city, and it also gives you the range on the highway. So I'm not sure we need to flip our systems completely upside down.
Right. So a country as vast as Canada, we're one of the largest countries in the world, and we're really spread out. Isn't there a market share for both EVs and traditional gas-powered vehicles?
I would say yes, because a lot of the push for this comes from urban centers and from the urbanized East, where people in Montreal or Toronto, especially those who are downtown, they don't understand that people here, especially those in rural communities, our farmers, our ranchers, our oil and gas workers, they're traveling hundreds of miles, and they need very reliable vehicles. They need the power of diesel. I think people don't understand that we can't just transform our delivery systems, our freight cars, big semis. The battery weight for a semi would make it almost impossible to carry a load of goods. So we can't do these things overnight, and I don't think it's been well thought out.
Battery weight for a semi would be astronomical, not to mention how much a battery for a train would be. Now, are there industry warnings that there's not enough rare earth materials on the planet to feed the needed resources for building future electric cars?
Yes, I think quite a few manufacturers, I think it was Toyota specifically, said that they're not going to really be going into EVs, and that was one of the reasons. And people have to understand, not only is the supply chain not there, because EVs use a lot of rare or critical minerals that are quite different from our conventional vehicles, which just basically rely on, iron and steel and aluminum. These use very exotic materials like rare earth minerals that are primarily mined out of China or out of contested areas in the Ukraine or out of Russia. So access to some of those markets is blocked, or access per se in China gives them an advantage over North America. And it would be, for some of these minerals, I think it was Simon Michaud who did a study for the Finnish Geological Survey, and he found that for some of the minerals, to mine sufficient minerals, it would take hundreds, if not thousands of years to meet the goals of the proposed EV switch and the net zero goals. Thousands of years.
Thousands, wow. Now, for electric vehicles, when you're driving around, you see a gas station. You'll see a gas station every few blocks. Not every one of them has a charging station, and the idea is that eventually there will be more charging stations, and we'll be charging up our vehicles at home. But do you have an idea of the estimate of the cost of electric cars to our electrical grid?
Well, it's enormous. As I mentioned, we would need at least 10,000 megawatts more power just for the EV policy. And that means that we would need at least, actually, as it turns out, we would need 19 Site C dam equivalents. And each one of those kind of power generation facilities takes 20 to 30 years to build. then you also need all the interconnecting wires, the integration services. It's a phenomenally complex thing, and people actually hate power lines. It's more than they hate pipelines. So it's not going to be something that can be accomplished overnight. So I think there was a report recently that we're at about $99 billion to do the full backup for the EV policy. I think that's probably low, but $99 billion to facilitate a car that is less efficient or vehicles that are less efficient and less suited to our climate seems like a non-starter to me.
Now, are electric cars just a stopgap before fuels such as hydrogen and ammonia become more commonplace?
I would say not. First of all, hydrogen and ammonia are very dangerous substances, and they're well handled in industrial settings where people are trained to handle them, and there's instrumental monitoring. But in the public's hands, I see quite a danger there, and this is supported by a hazardous expert who wrote an article which I assisted in the translation, and also by Samuel Ferfari, who's a professor in Belgium who worked for many years with hydrogen, and he sees it as an absolute non-starter. Not to mention, hydrogen also goes through many stages to be captured because it doesn't exist naturally in nature. It has to be made. And in that process, you're actually losing energy at every step, which is not what you want for energy. That's why oil, gas, and coal are so popular and so integral to our society, because they're energy dense and they give you more. They give you more energy, and they also give you more product stream. So I don't see hydrogen and ammonia becoming mainstream at all. And also there's no infrastructure. It's the same problem as for EVs, only much, much worse, because at least with EVs, we do have an electrical infrastructure that we can build onto and tap into.
Now, switching gears here, federal natural resources leader Jonathan Wilkinson has said he is moving ahead with the controversial Just Transition bill. He says he hopes his government will introduce the bill early this year, and that will transition workers from the oil and gas sector to green energy jobs. Now, your organization, Friends of Science, released a report on this proposed bill. What are some of the highlights from your report?
Well, I think the first question is just transition to what? If you look at the IEA, that's the International Energy Agency chart about Canada's total energy consumption, you'll find that wind and solar barely even surfaces on that chart. We're powered in this society by coal, natural gas, hydro, nuclear, oil, and some biomass. But wind and solar don't even figure. And wind and solar have to be made with oil, gas, and coal, huge quantities of oil, gas, and coal. So what are they contemplating that we would transition to, and what would those things be made from? Other aspects of it is, if we phased out oil and gas in the West, where would we get the replacement income? Because I don't remember the exact figure. I think it's about 18% of our exports are for our GDP is from oil, gas, and coal. So, what's going to replace that for income? That income, and the taxes paid by oil, gas, and coal companies, that is what funds our educational institution, it funds our healthcare, paves our roads, it runs our society, pays our government. So where will that money come from? Because you can't export wind and solar, and we don't have any of the wind and solar facilities in Canada either. And it would be very difficult to set them up because, again, a lot of the materials, the critical minerals, come from China. So you say, okay, well, we have a critical mineral policy in Canada now, which we do, but it takes about 16 years to get a mine up and running. And actually, I just heard the other day from the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, they were saying that not one major project has been approved under the new Environmental Act. So that would be Bill 69. So this is more than 4 years. Nothing has been approved under it. So how are you going to get these mines approved when you won't approve a pipeline, which is, something that we know how to do, and we have many of them all over North America? How can it be done? Just transition to what? To when?
Now, when we think of oil and gas, we think of fueling our vehicles and heating our homes. But could you just describe for a moment maybe the top 5 or 10 products that come from oil and gas? Because it's not just about gas and heat.
Well, it would be difficult to do the top 5, but let's start with the medical services industry. Almost all of modern medicine relies both on the energy from natural gas and coal and oil, and also the product stream. I mean, all the PPEs, all the masks, the gloves, the sterile use, single-use plastics that are used in surgery, almost everything, even pharmaceuticals, all of these things rely on byproducts from oil, gas, and coal. The modern medicine would vanish overnight without it. So do we really want to go back to kitchen table surgery and people boiling strips of old sheets as bandages? Clothing is made from different elements of oil and gas, plastics, all the plastic bottles. You go into a grocery store, look at how things are wrapped in like saran wrap and plastic bags for bread. Do we really want to get rid of all those things? If you're in a small village and you have a village baker and they give you bread over the counter with their hands, okay. But if you have bread being shipped hundreds of miles across the country, you want it safely stored in a plastic container, right? In a bag. So, there are lots of public health issues related to this notion of phasing out oil and gas, because all of those products that have made our public sanitation very good, they vanish. Then what happens to the public? We get sick.
Right. And you talked about modern medicine being effectively shut down just because of oil and gas. Now, Alberta shares its prosperity with other provinces through equalization payments. Now, much of that money comes from our oil and gas. How will other provinces be affected by these numerous Alberta industries being stifled or shut down?
Well, first of all, of course, there's the equalization payment, which I won't go into because it's been talked about a lot. But people don't realize that a lot of people work in Alberta. Some of them are traveling workers. They live in BC, Saskatchewan, the Maritimes. They come here, they work in the industry for maybe a few weeks and go home, or maybe a few months and go home. And they take their riches, if you like, back home, and they build prosperity at home. Maybe they start a small business, they buy their house that they've longed to buy. Many of our products heat the homes in other provinces. Like, people don't realize that British Columbia doesn't run on hydro, runs on about 59% natural gas. Propane in Alberta heats Quebec. There are many domino effects of trying to shut down Western oil and gas production. And when I say Western, I include Saskatchewan in this. They're a smaller producer than we are, but they're very important. Not to mention agriculture, fertilizer. Fertilizer is made from natural gas. And without fertilizer, you can't have the kind of abundant crops that we have today. And also when farmers harvest, many times the crops come in a bit damp. So they use what they call a natural gas dryer to dry the grain. And that's, very important to keep the quality of the grain up, because you don't want to harvest a crop and then have it go moldy. Then it's no good for human consumption. You might be able to use it for animals, but and we're at a critical point in the world right now, a very critical point. A lot of the fertilizer factories in Europe have shut down because the price of natural gas there has skyrocketed. They can't afford to operate anymore. And we've lost the fertilizer production out of the Ukraine. Whatever there is in Russia will be blockaded. I think the UN said there's something like 300 million people in the world now facing starvation. That's because the blockade of wheat and the loss of fertilizer. So we won't have abundant crops. and we will have many people facing famine. And if we shut down the oil and gas industry in Alberta, we'll make that worse for everyone else in the world and, of course, at home.
Well, I have so many more questions for you. This has been a great conversation, Michelle, but sadly we're out of time. But thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thanks very much.
The University of Lethbridge has been a fixture in southern Alberta since it began in 1967, and since then, thousands of students have passed through its doors to go on to use their education to impact the lives of people in our province, our country, and beyond the borders. To talk more about the changes at the university and the impacts its students are making across the world is Dr. Leroy Littlebear. Now, Dr. Littlebear has been the Vice Provost of Iniskim Indigenous Relations since 2022 and was the first Indigenous person to be quoted by the Supreme Court of Canada. His lifetime of accomplishments include some of the most important political achievements for Indigenous peoples in Canada and around the world. Very impressive. Dr. Leroy Littlebear, welcome to Bridge City News. So great to have you on today.
Thank you very much for having me on your show.
Absolutely. So you have a long list of education and accolades. Your dedication to education, leadership, and community have led to a United Nations declaration, have changed the Constitution of Canada, and influenced the lives of thousands of students. So all of this, and you didn't even attend school for the first time until you were 10. Very, very inspiring. But is there one thing that you hold close to your heart as your greatest accomplishment?
Not really. I think it's a number of things that it's almost like once you get going and hey, things start to evolve. And so it's that evolution of these events and so on that have led up to things like being noticed, if I can put it that way, by the Supreme Court of Canada, and leading up to things like the Native American Studies Department at the University of Lethbridge, leading up to things like the Buffalo Treaty. I've got a copy of that, and the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. So it's really an involvement of all these events. Yes.
That's incredible. Okay, so you have a long history with the University of Lethbridge. So are there one or two things that really stand out in your mind as the biggest and best changes at the U of L?
Yes. Well, I tell people about how Native American Studies, which is now known as Indigenous Studies, started. And I would say the turning point was when the university was still over there sharing space with the Lethbridge College. I was walking down the hallway, and the president's office, Sam Smith, had his door open. He kind of had an open door policy. And he saw me coming down the hallway. And he says, "Hey, Leroy, come on in. Let's have coffee." And I did. And he told me, "Hey, would you like to come out? I'd like to invite you. And would you like to come out for dinner at my place?" And he gave me the date, which is a couple of days later. And it was there, I thought he was just inviting me. And he, when I got there to his house, lo and behold, there was a whole bunch of faculty members there at his place and so on. And I thought to myself, he never told me that. I thought he was just inviting me. Being a student, I was always hungry. Yeah, I'll come for the food. Well, to make a long story short, he told us we've got a large Indigenous population surrounding our university, Lethbridge, and so on. This is Blackfoot country and so on. What can we do in cooperation with this Indigenous community and so on? And I was kind of put on the spot. You know, I said to
Right,
him, well,
in front of everybody too.
in front of everybody.
Yeah.
I said, I'm just a student here. Why don't you ask them? So, but it turned out that we had a summer job going out there to ask them. And that was where all the discussion around the development of an Indigenous program at the university. And you hardly hear about this back in the early 70s, see? And so the establishment of a full-fledged disciplinary department within the university, opening its door July 1st, 1975, was a big accomplishment for the university.
So that started the process where you were involved in helping establish the Native American Studies program at the U of L, which is now the Indigenous Studies program at the U of L. Yeah, that's incredible.
And we were a full-fledged disciplinary department. And hey, you never hear about that throughout the country back then. But now, especially with the impetus of the PRC, yes, you see Indigenous programs flowering, blossoming all over the place across the country. But U of L was the first one.
That's incredible. Now, when you think of younger Blackfoot generations, what is your hope for their future?
Well, my hope for their future is to come to institutions of higher learning, whether it be University of Lethbridge or elsewhere, but to make it comfortable for them, make it kind of like luxury for them to come to an institution, have the luxury to go to play around with ideas, concepts, and so on, so that, hey, when they leave the institution as graduates, hey, they'll become good contributing citizens. They'll become good, contributing members of their communities, and that's my hope for all the students that have come through. And so far, those students that have come through, that Indigenous students, hey, they're all employed.
That's incredible. Now, Dr. Littlebear, how do you see the work that you've done and the leadership that you've had as bridging the gap between cultures, not just at the university, but also on a national level?
Well, I see this as being given the opportunity. In other words, it wasn't just me. Well, there were leaders, for instance, Sam Smith that I referred to, and other presidents throughout the university that have given me and others the opportunity to come out and perform, so to speak, and play out this development, give ideas and so on. Hey, we've got an idea. Do you think this is something worthwhile we can do? And yes, they've jumped on, and Indigenous studies and all the happenings now on campus are blossoming and so on. But it's being given the opportunity.
Yeah, that's true. So I would imagine you were given opportunity, and then in turn, you want to give opportunity to the younger generation. I know, was it Isaac Newton that coined the phrase "standing on the shoulders of giants"? So there might have been some giants that positioned you to have the view of the future, your future possibilities for your life. So can you talk about the individuals that provided you with an ability to see what your future could be like? I bet you could have never imagined back when you were a youngster.
Yes. Well, when I was young, and let's say I was living on a reserve, grew up there. I went to school there, residential school. But I did have my older relatives, elders that gave us guidance. My my uncle Bernard, for instance, I spent many times, many days with him. And one of the things in his advice was, he said, I don't have any education. All the work that I do is sweat at the brow, breaking your back, hard labor type of work. Okay. I want you to go to school so that the way he put it was, you'll get paid for your thoughts.
I like that.
And yeah, but his caveat was, don't forget your people. That's the way he put it. And I've always operated by that advice.
Mm-hmm. How important was mentorship for you?
Oh, very, very important, because in our indigenous ways and our indigenous culture, our approach to education is out on the land. It's by actual experiential approaches. See? And so an example was, hey, we're out there cutting hay with the old style mowers and so on, even with a team of horses. Well, I was accompanying him, and one day he told me, okay, you've seen me do all this. It's now your turn. So it was through all the actual experience and so on. But then a large part of it also was the being able to speak my own language fluently. And so kind of like the thought processes that are brought about by the language. And that consequently, that rubbed off on me. And today, I really push for the notion of language. I really push for and try to educate people about thinking processes, metaphysics, paradigms, and so on, because those are the foundational basis of thought processes.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. What does mentorship in 2023 look like now compared to back when you were younger and receiving the mentorship?
Well, the view today, and especially of young people, it seems like there's to some extent, we had a large number of our older people, but they're seeing that those older people, those elders, are passing. Mm-hmm. And so there's now kind of an urgency on their part, that is the youth, to have elders with them. Because in the future, we, the young, are also going to be the elders. So we better try and learn as much as we can of our culture, our language, in addition to the education that we're getting at these institutions of higher learning. Because in the not too distant future, we'll be being referred to as elders. So the youth are taking it serious because they're seeing these elders passing away, and there's fewer and fewer of them.
Right. I want to switch gears for a minute here and just to talk about the successes of the university here in Lethbridge. So it's been rated as a top 6 university in the world. So who or what do you think can be credited for this high rating?
Well, my response to that is that the university has its foundational base as liberal education. Liberal education gives you a broad base to draw from.
Sure.
Okay. As opposed to, specialization. Say. So specialization is great if you want to know something really in depth. But generally speaking, what happens then is when you specialize too much, you might know everything within your specialty, but not much outside of the specialty. See, but a liberal education gives you a broad overview, which means you can come up with creative new ideas drawing on different parts of different foundational bases. And so it's that, let me put it this way, that's what brings about leadership, good leaders. See. Yeah. And I think that's what really is important about how University of Lethbridge brings about knowledge and education to its students.
Very interesting. Dr. Littlebear, looks like we are out of time here, but thanks so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Absolutely. That was Dr. Leroy Littlebear, Vice Provost of Inniskim Indigenous Relations at the University of Lethbridge. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks so much for watching.